This is John Jackman's journal. He was a soldier with the 9th Kentucky Infantry. This is the Battle of Resaca, May 7th, 1864. We are again on the warpath. I think I shall now have something more stirring to put in my journal than church-goings and keeping a meteorological table. Between 9 and 10 a.m., our cavalry was driven from Tunnel Hill, and soon after we received our orders to hold ourselves in readiness for action. At 1 p.m., we moved out and took position on a little ridge just beyond Mill Creek Gap towards Tunnel Hill. Our brigade rested on the railroad on the right and there connected with Stewart's division, our division extending around to the left to the base of Buzzard Roost. We lay around all evening witnessing a little skirmish among the cavalry in front. We could see blue lines up towards the tunnel, 3 miles off. It has been a pleasant spring day. At 12 at night, we moved back through the gap and formed as a reserve to Stewart, our left resting on the railroad. May 8th. At 11 a.m., our brigade moved to the right and took position on top of Rocky Face. The day was hot, and the hill, or rather mountain, being long and steep, we had quite a hard time getting to our position. Sometimes we would have to clamber up places almost perpendicular. The brigade, in a single rank, was deployed almost as far apart as skirmishers. The position is a strong one. The hill towards the enemy is long and steep and is covered with trees. At the top, however, a wall of solid rock rises, sometimes as high as 40 or 50 feet, and in places even projects over. These rocks also rise above the top of the hill, forming a natural breastwork, thus protecting us from shells. The valley or plain towards Tunnel Hill is blue with Federals. Sherman has a large army. The enemy drove back our skirmishers this evening all along the line. This little battle we could plainly see. In the evening, their sharpshooters got close enough to annoy us. I was sent with an order down the hill to our skirmish line and, having accidentally passed through an interval, came near being gobbled. Tonight, thousands of campfires are gleaming in the valley, and the Federal bands are giving us a serenade. When our soldiers request them to play Dixie, they readily comply, but always taper off with Yankee Doodle. May 9th. Before daylight, our drums rattled reveille, and about the same time, our neighbors out in front commenced drumming and bugling, making a tremendous noise. Soon the gray light of morning came, and presently the sun rose clear and bright. A mist settled in the valley beneath and out over the plain, and it was some time before we could see what was going on. At last the fog broke away, and we could see the blue columns marching and taking new positions. We could see for miles up and down the valley, and to the west we could see even as far as Lookout Mountain, nearly 40 miles off. Over this wide expanse of country the fog had settled down in spots, and in the light of the morning sun it had much the appearance of lakes of water, clear and sparkling. At 8 a.m., Manny's brigade of Cheatham's division came and relieved us, and we marched down the hill, which we found almost as tiresome as coming up. The morning was very hot. We halted to rest at the camp, marked E on the map. Our regiment then clambered up Buzzard Roost and took position as marked for 5 inches on the map, a wing resting on either side of the battery, or Fort Montgomery, as we called it. We found this position naturally fortified as it was on Rocky Face. We could see the fields out in front blue with Federals. They now occupied the little ridge we were on the first evening. Sharpshooting commenced on both sides, and the popping was kept up all day. The Minis whistled freely over the rocks which protected us. Batteries occasionally opened on the fort, which was shelling the woods below, and often the shells would strike against the massive rocks, never jarring them. Received a letter from home by flag of truce, but could hardly get to read it, an assault being threatened. 17 Federal regiments were massed at the base of the hill. As they came marching by the flank across the fields, the sun shining upon their bright guns, the column seemed a stream of molten silver. We had one man mortally wounded today, and one had his arm shot off. The night being pleasant, I spread my blanket down on a huge rock and slept soundly until morning. May 10th, a beautiful morning. With the light of day came the sounds of the sharpshooters' rifles, which have been continually popping all day. Rained between 10 and 12 o'clock. Cloudy, disagreeable evening. Nothing of any interest occurred. At dark, a rain set in and continued until midnight. The judge and I got under a projecting rock, and with a blanket over our heads kept dry, but could not lie down to sleep. The boys kept up such a yelling, one could not have slept in a good bed. Passed a most disagreeable night. Too wet to sleep. May 11th. Dense fog this morning, but soon lifted, and the sharpshooters commenced. In the evening, brisk shelling through the gap from both sides. We have been expecting an assault all day. About 8 miles off, to the left, we could see Sherman's supply train moving towards Resaca. The train seemed miles in length. As dark was setting in, the Federals tried to force back our skirmishers in front of Stuart, but failed. Had quite a fight, all of which we could plainly see. The evening was cold and damp. May 12th. Cold wind from the east, which, being elevated as we are, has a full sweep at us. The enemy commenced moving from our front this morning to our left and have kept it up all day. Though thousands have gone, they can hardly be missed from our front. The supply train noticed yesterday is still moving, and no end to it yet. Sharpshooting and shelling kept up all day by both sides. Late this evening, they commenced putting batteries in front of us as though they intend to shell us out. At 9:30 p.m., we fell in and marched 5 miles to Dug Gap, to our left, where we halted about midnight and lay down to sleep. May 13th. We were allowed to rest for about an hour and a half or 2 hours. Then we marched towards Resaca, a distance of 10 miles. At daylight, we came up with Cleburne, who was fortified on the side of the road. We passed him and halted in line of battle until he passed us. Then we moved forward. About noon we halted when within 3 or 4 miles of Resaca, and I had a good nap. Late in the evening we moved to the left of the road, and a detail worked on fortifications all night. We were held in reserve to the balance of the division. Had a good night's sleep. May 14th. Early ordered further to the left. Just before we fell in, rations of whiskey were issued, and some of the boys got so top-heavy they could hardly march. In fact, some got so bad off, they had to be helped along. When we got to the position, as indicated on the map, our regiment first commenced fortifying, where the 2nd Kentucky Infantry afterwards took position. But we moved to the point also indicated on the map, and commenced finishing the works partly constructed by Tyler's brigade, which was to lie in reserve. The works commenced were only piles of rail and logs not capable of resisting shells, so we got tools and commenced ditching. By 10 a.m. we had pretty good works, and just in time for about that hour, our skirmishers, Company A, were driven in, the men skirmishing beautifully. Soon after, 2 lines of battle burst out of the woods in front of us and started up on the charge. We soon commenced saluting them. So did Slocum's battery on our left, and they retired. A more vigorous charge was made at the same time on the right of the brigade, there being several lines, and they came up within 50 paces of the works before being repulsed. The day has passed without our regiment being charged again. Several charges have been made on the right of our brigade and in front of Hindman during the day. In the evening, the roar of musketry to our right was quite loud. We have been kept close by the sharpshooters today, having nothing to protect us but our works. The enemy is on the edge of the woods, 300 or 400 yards off, while we are in an open field. We could not get out after water until after dark. The artillery has been playing the wilds with us. Several batteries are in our front on a favorable hill for them, and have kept up a shelling all day. Slocum's pieces being unprotected, he has been unable to fire much. The sharpshooters, as well as 3 batteries against him. Captain Slocum and a gunner would occasionally slip up from behind the hill, the captain loading a piece himself, and the gunner would fire it. Then they would both take shelter behind the ridge. Immediately a shower of shells would come flying over and would mow down the trees about his guns, but strange to say, not a gun was injured. The sharpshooters, too, would turn loose at him at the same time. In the evening, a battery to our right opened an enfilading fire on the left of our regiment. Company A suffered most, as they had to be out on the skirmish line in the morning and did not have an opportunity to strengthen their works. Lieutenant McLean of that company was badly wounded by the first shot and called for the infirmary corps, but had hardly ceased when the second shot came, killing him instantly, and 3 men, Privates France, King, and Edmondson, besides wounding several. The fire was kept up some time, wounding several others, but killing no more. Company A was on the left of the regiment, across the ravine from me, and I was looking at the company, which was lying in rank, behind the ill-constructed works. At the time, the second enfilading shot struck, and I saw the men tossed about like chaff. Sergeant Wycliffe, Company C, was killed early in the action by a sharpshooter. The 4th and 2nd Regiments have been enfiladed all day by the middle battery and have lost many killed and wounded. At night, strengthening our works, we worked all night. May 15th. We look more like standing a siege this morning. Our left companies over the ravine have thrown up traverses impregnable to both shell or solid shot, which will protect them from enfilading fires. Slocum has thrown up works for his battery, and the 2nd and 4th have made traverses to protect them against the enfilade. Slocum opened early, but 2 great odds against him. 2 of his pieces were cut down by shot passing through the embrasures. Sharp shooting all day. Had several men wounded by stray minis coming across from the right. The sun has been very hot, and we have had no protection from its rays. As twilight was coming in, I left the works to go after water, thinking it too dark for me to be seen, but I was discovered and had a shower of minis sent after me. At last, darkness came, and a line of skirmishers was sent a short distance over the works to watch the movements of the enemy. The Federal skirmishers also advanced out into the field, and we had a conversation at long range with them. We found them to be Kentuckians, Rousseau's old legion. They inquired for several men in our regiment. We have not been assaulted today. All the fighting was to our right. Sometimes the musketry would roar like they were having pretty hot work. Cleburne and Cheatham to our left have not been engaged yet. At 9 p.m., the signal gun fired, and we commenced falling back. The moon was shining bright, and while moving back from the works, company at a time, the men were ordered to hold their guns in front of them so the reflection could not be seen by the enemy. The skirmishers were left before the works, and we moved with the utmost silence. Our brigade got separated from the division before we got into town, and we started to move on the railroad, but halted and went back and took the dirt road. Having lost time, we had to double quick. Before we got to the bridge, the Federals opened artillery all around the lines, and the skirmishers on both sides opened a brisk fire. Times looked a little squally there, but the firing soon ceased, and we continued our march. The road being crowded with troops, we did not get to Calhoun, 7 miles distant, until about daylight. May 16th, rested in line of battle until noon, when we fell in and moved out on the Adairsville Road. Soon we were turned back and had to double quick through town, out on the road from Snake Creek Gap to Adairsville, and formed line of battle. The skirmishers of the Federal Corps, which had crossed the river, were driven in, and our lines were being formed to advance and take that corps in out of the wet, when an order came to General Hardee, stopping the movement. Sherman, with his main army, was pressing too close down the Calhoun road. Night came on without our moving or further fighting, save light skirmishing. Tonight we have large fires kindled, and I anticipate a good night's rest. We may move, though, before morning. The enemy came into Calhoun about sundown, May 17th, at 2 a.m., fell in and marched for Adairsville, 12 or 15 miles. The sun rose clear, and we had nice marching before it got too hot. The country between Adairsville and Calhoun is beautiful. The forest trees look like Kentucky, and large fields of corn are on either side of the road. About noon, we stacked arms near town for a rest. At 1 p.m., the rain poured down in torrents for nearly an hour. The enemy was pressing Cheatham about 2 miles back on the road, and at 2 p.m. we fell in and marched back to his support. We formed a line of battle to the left of the railroad and in the rear of Cheatham. There were 4 or 5 lines of battle, and we, being in the rear line, had nothing to do but shift from right to left or vice versa as the occasion required, while the front lines were fortifying like smoke. Old Pat's division was there also, in fact all of Hardee's corps, Hood's, and part of Polk's corps, having kept the Cassville road. 2 divisions of Polk's corps had joined us at Resaca. Batteries shelled at long range, but none of the shells reached us. Maney's brigade of Cheatham's division had quite a fight at the Octagon House on the road late in the afternoon. Night has now come on, and we have fires kindled, and, as Dr. Walter J. Burns says, have had spy routes issued, which the boys appreciate after being exposed to inclement weather. At 10 p.m., fell in and marched through Adairsville towards Kingston. The night was dark, the road muddy and crowded with troops. We would march probably a few steps, then halt a moment, not long enough to sit down to rest. We were until after daylight marching 10 or 12 miles. Once, while standing in the road, one of the men who had his gun swung across his back went to sleep and fell back against me, his gun sadly bruising my nose. May 18th. Rested at Kingston a while in the morning, then fell in and marched 3 miles towards Cass Station. The day was very hot. We stacked arms, and I went to a creek to take a bath. All quiet for the balance of the day. I slept well at night. May 19th. At noon, a battle order was read to the troops from General Johnston, Commander-in-Chief, stating the time had come to decide matters by a general battle. The order was Napoleonic and elicited loud cheers from the troops. They seemed anxious to fight. Soon after the order was read, we fell in and marched out to form a line. Our first position was in advance of the main line, as afterward formed to give battle. We had only a few shells thrown at us. Cleburne, at the same time, was over on the left of the railroad, and his men marched right up to a Federal battery before they knew it, thinking it was one of our own. Granberry had to get back in a hurry. After we had worked a while at our first position, our division marched off by the flank towards Cassville. We marched about the town first, in line of battle, tearing down fences, etc., then moved around to the left to support Cleburne. The evening was very hot, and we suffered much from heat. General Johnston passed us late in the afternoon, soon after arriving in rear of Cleburne, and the boys cheered him loudly, which seemed to please the general very much. Soon after, old Pat came along, and the boys commenced cheering him. He told them he liked to see them in good spirits, but that they ought not yell so loud. that it would cause our lines to be shelled. About sundown, drew rations. Tonight, a heavy detail from the regiment to construct works to our left. I shall now try for some sleep, as there will be no rest for the weary tomorrow. All are looking for a big fight. May 20th, at 2 a.m., woke up and we marched down the railroad 7 miles to Cartersville. On the Etowah River, where we arrived at daylight. We were in an old field near the bridge until noon before we crossed. The sun was very hot, and the time was not pleasantly spent. We crossed on a pontoon bridge. About 2 miles from the river, we turned to the right and bivouacked on a high hill, at the base of which, on the railroad, is the Etowah Iron Works. These hills are composed almost entirely of iron ore. Here we found our wagon train, and I immediately took a bath and changed my clothes. 'Tis said the reason we did not fight at Cassville was that Hood and Polk declared they could not hold their position. May 21st, slept magnificently last night. All quiet until late in the evening, some cannonading down the river. Sherman, I presume, is flanking us on the left. Pleasant day, resting up. May 22nd, a very hot day, and the water being so far off, we suffered from thirst. Church at 10 a.m. In the evening, the association met near the 6th Kentucky Infantry and found several of the members had been killed. I went over to hear the proceedings and listened to several eulogies on dead comrades pronounced by different members. May 23rd, at 11 a.m., moved out on the road towards Dallas. The road was so blocked up by troops, we were until sundown marching 8 miles. Having to stand up in the road seems more tiresome than rapid marching. Had a shower of rain in the evening. Before that, it was very hot. May 24th, at 2 a.m., we were on the road. After marching 5 miles towards Dallas, our brigade was formed in a line of battle across a road coming in from towards the river. Went with the company on the skirmish line. We had a most lazy time all day. After taking a good nap, I finished the day reading Miss Evans' new novel, Macaria. Showery during the day, continuous cannonading in front. Late, the enemy came out on the main Dallas road, and Tyler had quite a skirmish. About sundown, we were taken off skirmish and joined the regiment, which had moved back to New Hope Church. Marched 5 miles after dark and stopped within 2 miles of Dallas. It rained nearly all night, and I slept on 3 fence rails placed side by side, one end of the rails resting up against the fence to give inclination so the water would run off. Did not sleep very well. May 25th. All serene this morning, both in point of weather and warfare. At noon, moved half a mile near a town and bivouacked near a good spring. About sundown, the musketry roared terribly towards our right. We later learned that the enemy charged Stewart near New Hope Church and was repulsed with heavy loss. It set in raining about dark. Adjutant W.D. Chipley, Johnny Green, and I made a fly out of blankets, which kept off the rain. Slept very well. On the morning of the 25th, after we had stacked arms, K and W of Company B went out bear hunting, but having failed in finding a bear, brought in a sheep. I don't know how they managed to find such animals, death being the penalty for firing a gun in the rear of the tents. They caught the sheep with salt. W, though a Jew, is death on swine. He kills more hogs than any man in the regiment. Finley's brigade was fortifying in front of us during the evening. Brigadier General Finley is away, having been wounded at Resaca. The brigade is commanded by Colonel Robert Bullock. Brigadier General Robert C. Tyler is also away, having been wounded at Missionary Ridge. His brigade is now commanded by Colonel Thomas B. Smith. General Joseph H. Lewis is on hand. This concludes the 12th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more stories and leave a comment.